Here are 100 facts from history. They come from different times and places. They concern ordinary aspects of life. Each fact is presented simply. There is no particular order. The facts are simply facts. Fact 1. In ancient Egypt, pillows were made of stone or wood. These pillows were not soft. They were hard surfaces, curved to support the neck. The head rested in the air, elevated by the curved pillow. This kept insects away from the face during sleep. It also protected elaborate hairstyles. Stone pillows were common. They served their purpose. People slept with them for thousands of years. Fact 2. Medieval Europeans rarely bathed in water. They believed water opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. Instead, they changed their undergarments frequently. Clean linen against the skin was thought to absorb impurities. Wealthy people owned many linen shirts. They changed them daily. This was their form of cleanliness. The practice continued for centuries. Fact 3. In ancient Rome, purple dye was extremely expensive. The dye came from sea snails. Thousands of snails were needed to produce a small amount of dye. Therefore, purple cloth was costly. Only the very wealthy could afford it. Laws were passed restricting who could wear purple. The colour indicated status. It was reserved for the emperor and the highest officials. Fact 4. Japanese samurai wore perfume. The perfume was subtle. It was considered part of proper grooming. A samurai's scent was noticed by others. Different incense and fragrances were preferred by different individuals. The practice showed refinement. It demonstrated attention to personal presentation. Perfume was part of warrior culture, not opposed to it. Fact 5. In medieval Europe, people ate most food with their hands. Forks were rare. They existed but were not commonly used. People used knives to cut food. They used spoons for liquids. Solid food was picked up with fingers. This was normal. Hands were washed before and after meals. Eating with hands was the standard practice. Fact 6. Ancient Mesopotamians kept written records on clay tablets. The tablets were small, fitting in the hand. Information was pressed into wet clay with a stylus. The clay dried. The record became permanent. Thousands of these tablets have survived. They record business transactions, legal agreements, and daily activities. The tablets show us what ordinary people did. Fact 7. In Victorian England, calling cards were used for social visits. A person visiting someone's home would leave a card with their name. The card announced their visit. If the person was not home, the card indicated the visit had been attempted. There were elaborate rules about cards. Different corners folded meant different things. The system was complex, but understood. Fact 8. Aztec children attended school. All children, both boys and girls, received education. Boys learned military skills and trades. Girls learned household management and weaving. The education was mandatory. It began around age 15. Schools were run by the community. Education was valued in Aztec society. Fact 9. In ancient Greece, women wore their hair up after marriage. Unmarried girls wore their hair down or in simple styles. The change in hairstyle marked the change in status. Everyone could see whether a woman was married by looking at her hair. The convention was consistent. It required no explanation. Fact 10. Medieval monks developed a sign language. They used it during periods of silence. Different hand gestures represented different words and concepts. The signs allowed communication without speaking. This was necessary because monastic rules required silence at certain times. The sign language was elaborate. It covered many topics needed for daily monastery life. Fact 11. In ancient China, foot binding was practiced among wealthy families. Young girls' feet were wrapped tightly. The binding changed the shape of the feet over time. Small feet were considered beautiful. They indicated that a woman did not need to work. The practice was painful and limiting. It continued for about 1,000 years. Fact 12. Colonial American women made their own soap. They saved animal fat throughout the year. In spring, they made soap in large batches. Lye was made from wood ashes. The lye was mixed with the fat. The mixture was boiled. After cooling and cutting, it became soap. The process took days. It was annual work. Fact 13. Ancient Egyptians used honey as medicine. Honey was applied to wounds. It has natural antibacterial properties, though ancient Egyptians did not know this in modern terms. They observed that honey helped wounds heal. Therefore, they used it regularly. The practice was effective. Honey was valuable for both food and medicine. Fact 14. In medieval Japan, teeth blackening was fashionable among married women. A black dye was applied to teeth. This indicated married status. It also was thought to preserve teeth. The practice was called ohaguro. It continued into the late 19th century. Then it was discouraged as Japan modernized. Fact 15. Roman children played with dolls. The dolls were made of clay, wood, or ivory. They had movable limbs. Some dolls had tiny clothes and accessories. Girls played with these dolls much as modern children do. The dolls have been found in archaeological sites. They show us that play has always been part of childhood. Fact 16. In medieval England, ale was measured for quality by an official called an ale conner. The ale conner tested ale to ensure it was properly made. One test involved pouring ale on a wooden bench and sitting in it. If the bench stuck to the ale conner's leather pants, the ale had too much sugar and was not properly fermented. This was a real method of testing. Fact 17. Ancient Persians celebrated the new year at the spring equinox. The celebration was called Nowruz. It continues to be celebrated today in some cultures. The tradition is over 3,000 years old. People cleaned their homes. They visited family. They prepared special foods. The celebration marked the renewal of nature. Fact 18. In colonial America, books were rare and expensive. Families might own only a Bible and perhaps one or two other books. Books were treasured possessions. They were read repeatedly. When someone learned to read, they often had very few texts available. This scarcity made each book valuable. Fact 19. Ancient Romans used urine as a cleaning agent. Urine contains ammonia. Ammonia is effective at cleaning and whitening. Urine was collected and used to clean togas and to process leather. Public urinals existed partly to collect urine for these purposes. The practice was common and not considered unusual. Fact 20. In medieval times, people told time by church bells. Bells rang at set times throughout the day. These times marked the hours of prayer. People organized their activities around these bells. The bells provided a shared sense of time. Mechanical clocks existed, but were rare. Bells were the common timekeeping method. Fact 21. Japanese tea ceremony developed over centuries. It became highly formalized. Every movement had meaning. The way tea was prepared and served followed strict rules. The ceremony emphasized mindfulness and simplicity. It was a form of meditation. The practice continues today, maintaining ancient traditions. Fact 22. In ancient Babylon, beer was a dietary staple. It was consumed daily by people of all ages. Beer was thick and nutritious. It was drunk through straws to avoid the sediment. Different grades of beer existed for different social classes. Beer was safer to drink than water. It was fundamental to the diet. Fact 23. Medieval European women wore their keys on their belts. The keys opened chests, cupboards, and storerooms. Carrying the keys indicated the woman's responsibility for household management. The jangling of keys announced her approach. The keys were both practical tools and status symbols. Fact 24. In ancient India, the number 0 was developed. This was a significant mathematical innovation. 0, as a placeholder and as a number in its own right, changed mathematics. The concept spread from India to the Arab world and then to Europe. This happened over several centuries. 0 is now fundamental to mathematics. Fact 25. Colonial American children learned to write on birch bark. Paper was expensive and scarce. Birch bark was free and available. Children practiced their letters on bark before graduating to precious paper. The bark was smooth enough to write on. It served the purpose adequately. Fact 26. Ancient Greeks sweetened food with honey. They had no sugar. Honey was the primary sweetener. It was used in cooking and in drinks. Beekeeping was an established practice. Honey was valuable. It was stored carefully and used sparingly in some households, more freely in wealthy ones. Fact 27. In medieval Europe, windows in ordinary homes had no glass. Openings were covered with shutters. The shutters could be closed for privacy and weather protection. They could be opened for light and air. Glass windows were expensive. Only churches and wealthy homes had them. Most people lived with shuttered openings. Fact 28. Inca messengers ran along mountain roads carrying information. The runners were called chasqui. They worked in relay. One runner would carry a message to a station. Another runner would take it to the next station. This system allowed messages to travel quickly across the empire. The runners were trained from youth. Running was their occupation. Fact 29. In ancient Egypt, bread sometimes contained sand. The grain was ground with stone mills. Small particles of stone mixed into the flour. This sand got into the bread. People ate it anyway. Over time, the sand wore down their teeth. Ancient Egyptian mummies show heavily worn teeth. This was a consequence of their bread. Fact 30. Medieval scribes wrote on parchment. Parchment was made from animal skins. Sheep, goat, or calf skins were cleaned, stretched, and scraped. The result was a smooth surface for writing. Making parchment was labor-intensive. Therefore, parchment was valuable. Scribes wrote carefully to avoid wasting it. Fact 31. In ancient Rome, going to the baths was a social activity. People met friends at the baths. They discussed business. They exercised in attached gymnasiums. The baths included hot, warm, and cold rooms. Visitors progressed through these rooms. The experience took several hours. It was a regular part of life. Fact 32. Polynesian navigators crossed vast ocean distances. They used stars, wave patterns, and bird behavior to navigate. They had no instruments. The knowledge was passed down orally. Navigators memorized vast amounts of information. They successfully settled islands across the Pacific. Their skill was remarkable. Fact 33. In medieval Europe, meals were announced by a horn or bell. When food was ready, a signal was given. People gathered to eat. There were no set meal times in the modern sense. People ate when food was prepared. The signal coordinated the household or community. Fact 34. Ancient Chinese developed silk production. The process was kept secret for centuries. Silkworms were raised on mulberry leaves. They spun cocoons. The cocoons were unwound to produce silk thread. The thread was woven into fabric. Silk was valuable. It was exported along trade routes. Fact 35. In colonial New England, beds were expensive. Many households had only 1 or 2 beds. Children slept several to a bed. Some family members slept on pallets on the floor. Servants slept in kitchens or workrooms. Beds were furniture reserved for parents and perhaps the oldest children. Fact 36. Ancient Mayans played a ball game using rubber balls. Natural rubber was available in their region. They processed it to make balls. The balls were heavy and solid. The game had ritual significance. Courts for playing existed in many Mayan cities. The game was part of religious and social life. Fact 37. In medieval times, spices were very expensive. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg came from distant lands. They were transported over long distances. This made them costly. Spices were used sparingly. They were luxuries. Only the wealthy used them regularly. Fact 38. Ancient Egyptians kept cats as pets. Cats were valued for controlling rodents. They protected grain stores from mice and rats. Cats were also considered sacred animals. When a pet cat died, families mourned. Cats were sometimes mummified. They held a special place in Egyptian culture. Fact 39. In Japan during the Edo period, people rented books. Lending libraries existed. People paid a small fee to borrow books for a short time. This made reading accessible to more people. Books were still expensive to own. Renting allowed wider access to literature. Fact 40. Medieval Europeans believed in the 4 humours. These were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health required balance among the humours. Illness meant imbalance. Treatments aimed to restore balance. This theory guided medicine for over 1,000 years. Fact 41. In ancient Rome, apartment buildings existed. These were called insulae. Multiple families lived in one building. The buildings were several stories tall. The lower floors were more desirable. Upper floors were cheaper, but less convenient. Many Romans lived in these apartment buildings. Fact 42. Aztecs used cacao beans as currency. The beans had standardized value. They were used to buy goods in markets. A turkey might cost 100 beans. A rabbit might cost 30 beans. The beans were money. They were also the source of chocolate drinks. Cacao was valuable in multiple ways. Fact 43. In medieval Europe, people went to bed when it got dark. There was little artificial light. Candles and lamps were used sparingly. Darkness meant the day ended. People slept longer in winter when nights were long. They slept less in summer when nights were short. Sleep followed natural light patterns. Fact 44. Ancient Greeks voted using coloured pebbles or pottery shards. Different colours represented different choices. People placed their pebbles in designated containers. The container with the most pebbles won. This was direct democracy. Citizens participated in political decisions this way. Fact 45. In colonial America, corn was a staple food. Corn was native to the Americas. Colonists learned to grow it from Native Americans. Corn could be prepared many ways. It was ground into meal for bread. Kernels were boiled. It stored well. Corn sustained many communities. Fact 46. Medieval people thought bathing while menstruating was dangerous. They believed it could cause illness or madness. Therefore, women avoided bathing during their periods. This belief was widespread. It persisted for centuries. Medical understanding was very different then. Fact 47. In ancient Persia, ice was stored in special buildings called yakchuls. These buildings were insulated. Ice was collected in winter. It was stored for use in summer. The ice remained frozen due to the building's design. This allowed cold drinks and food preservation in hot months. Fact 48. Viking ships were built without nails in some parts. The planks were overlapped and tied together. This made the ships flexible. They could bend with waves. The flexibility made them seaworthy. The construction technique was sophisticated. Fact 49. In medieval times, ale was sometimes paid as wages. Workers received food and drink as part of payment. Ale was a common component. This was practical. Ale was valuable and consumed daily. Payment in ale was acceptable to workers. Fact 50. Ancient Romans reclined while eating formal meals. They lay on couches arranged around a table. They propped themselves on their left arms. They ate with their right hands. This posture was considered civilized. Standing or sitting to eat was less refined. Fact 51. In ancient Japan, the New Year was the most important holiday. People cleaned their homes thoroughly. They paid debts. They visited shrines. Special foods were prepared. The holiday marked a fresh start. Everyone celebrated together. The practices created renewal. Fact 52. Medieval European cities had curfews. A bell rang at a set time in the evening. After the curfew bell, fires were supposed to be covered or extinguished. People were expected to be in their homes. This reduced the risk of fire. It also reduced crime. The curfew was enforced. Fact 53. Inca people kept records using quipu. A quipu was a series of knotted strings. Different colors and knot types represented different information. The system recorded numbers and possibly other data. Trained officials could read quipu. This allowed record keeping without writing. Fact 54. In ancient Greece, olives were a major crop. Olive trees grew well in the Greek climate. Olives were eaten. Olive oil was used for cooking, lighting, and cleaning. The oil was valuable. It was exported. Olives were fundamental to the Greek economy. Fact 55. Colonial American women made their own candles. They saved animal fat throughout the year. In autumn, they melted the fat. Wicks were dipped repeatedly in the melted fat. Each dip added a layer. Eventually, candles formed. The process was tedious but necessary. Candles provided light through winter. Fact 56. In medieval Europe, people believed ringing church bells could dispel storms. When storms threatened, bells were rung vigorously. This was thought to protect the community. The belief was sincere. Bell ringing during storms was common practice. Fact 57. Ancient Chinese used chopsticks for eating. Chopsticks have been used for thousands of years. They were practical utensils. Food was cut into small pieces before cooking. Therefore, no knife was needed at the table. Chopsticks were sufficient. The practice continues today. Fact 58. In ancient Rome, laundry was done by fullers. Fullers were professional cleaners. They cleaned togas and other garments. The process involved soaking, beating, and treating fabric with various substances, including urine. Clean garments were returned to their owners. Fulling was an established trade. Fact 59. Medieval European shoes were not shaped for left or right feet. Shoes were identical. They could be worn on either foot. Over time, they molded somewhat to the wearer's feet, but initially there was no distinction. This was standard shoe construction. Fact 60. In ancient Egypt, workers received payment in grain, beer, and other goods. Money as we know it was not common. Workers were given rations. These rations sustained them and their families. The system functioned for centuries. Payment in goods was normal. Fact: 61 Japanese farmers developed detailed agricultural calendars. They tracked the best times for planting and harvesting. The knowledge was based on generations of observation. Weather patterns, moon phases, and other indicators were noted. Following the calendar improved yields. The calendars were passed down in families. Fact 62. In medieval Europe, hair was rarely washed. Dirt was brushed out. Perfume or powder was applied to mask odours. Actually, washing hair was occasional. Water and soap were not readily available for this purpose. People managed their hair with brushing and aromatic substances. Fact 63. Ancient Romans had public toilets. These were communal facilities with stone seats arranged in rows. Fact 64. In colonial America, hornbooks were used to teach children. A hornbook was a wooden paddle with a printed page attached. The page was covered with a thin layer of horn to protect it. Children learned letters and prayers from hornbooks. The horn made the page durable. Children could handle it roughly without damaging the text. Fact 65. Medieval people often shared beds with strangers when travelling. Inns had limited space. Travellers slept several to a bed. This was accepted practice. People of the same gender shared beds. It was economical. It was expected. Privacy was less valued than in later periods. Fact 66. In ancient China, government officials were selected through examinations. The exams tested knowledge of classical texts. Men studied for years to prepare. Passing the exams led to government positions. The system was merit-based. It continued for over 1,000 years. Fact 67. Polynesian people made cloth from bark. Bark was stripped from certain trees. It was soaked, beaten, and dried. The result was a flexible cloth called tapa. The cloth was decorated with designs. It was used for clothing and ceremonial purposes. Fact 68. In medieval Europe, some legal disputes were settled by compurgation. The accused person would swear an oath of innocence. Then, a number of other people would swear that the accused person's oath was trustworthy. If enough people swore, the accused was declared innocent. The system relied on communal testimony. Fact 69. Ancient Egyptians wore eye makeup. Both men and women lined their eyes with kohl. This was partly cosmetic and partly practical. The dark lines reduced glare from the sun. They also may have had antibacterial properties. Eye makeup was common at all levels of society. Fact 70. In Japan, rice was the measure of wealth. A samurai's stipend was given in measures of rice. Land was valued by how much rice it could produce. Rice was currency, food, and the basis of the economy. Everything related back to rice production. Fact 71. Medieval European houses often had animals living in them. Chickens, pigs, and sometimes cows stayed inside, especially in winter. The animals provided warmth. Their presence was practical. The arrangement was normal in rural households. Fact 72. In ancient Rome, dining couches were arranged in a specific pattern. 3 couches formed a U-shape around a table. This arrangement was called a triclinium. The position of a guest on these couches indicated their status. The most honoured guest had a specific place. Everyone understood this social geography. Fact 73. Colonial American families often had 10 or more children. Large families were common. Child mortality was high, so having many children was practical. Children were also economic assets. They worked on farms and in households. Large families were the norm. Fact 74. In medieval times, mirrors were made of polished metal. Glass mirrors with reflective backing did not exist yet. Metal mirrors showed a dimmer reflection. They required polishing to maintain their reflectivity. Only the wealthy had mirrors. Most people rarely saw their own reflections. Fact 75. Ancient Mayans valued jade more than gold. Jade was sacred. It represented life and agriculture. Jade objects were buried with important people. Gold was used but was less significant. The value of materials differed from European values. Fact 76. In Victorian England, mourning had strict rules. Widows wore black for years after their husband's death. The shade of black, the fabric, and the amount of ornamentation changed in stages. Each stage indicated the progression of mourning. Society monitored adherence to these rules. Mourning was a public, regulated process. Fact 77. Ancient Greek homes were simple. Most people lived in small houses with few rooms. Furniture was minimal. People sat on stools or benches. They stored belongings in chests. Wealthy homes were larger, but still relatively simple by modern standards. Simplicity was normal. Fact 78. In medieval Europe, bread trenchers served as plates. A thick slice of bread was used as a base for food. Sauces and meats soaked into the bread. After the meal, the trencher was eaten or given to the poor. This saved washing dishes. It was practical and common. Fact 79. Aztec children were educated in proper behavior from young ages. Instruction was strict. Children learned through proverbs and sayings. Respect for elders was emphasized. Hard work was valued. The education shaped character. Parents and teachers shared this responsibility. Fact 80. In ancient Rome, toothpaste was made from various ingredients. Crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal were used. The mixture was abrasive. It cleaned teeth through scrubbing action. The taste was probably unpleasant, but it served its purpose. Dental hygiene was practiced. Fact 81. Medieval European women wore veils or head coverings. Married women especially covered their hair. This was a sign of modesty. Uncovered hair on a married woman was considered improper. The practice was consistent across different regions. Head coverings were normal female attire. Fact 82. In ancient Persia, mail service existed. Mounted couriers carried messages across the empire. Stations were established at regular intervals. Fresh horses were available at each station. This allowed messages to travel quickly. The system was organized and reliable. Fact 83. Colonial American housewives made ink. They boiled walnut hulls or oak galls. The liquid that resulted was dark. It could be used for writing. Making ink was part of household production. The ink was not as refined as commercial ink, but was functional. Fact 84. In medieval times, people believed in bloodletting as medicine. They thought removing blood restored the balance of humours. Bloodletting was used to treat many conditions. Physicians and barbers performed the procedure. The practice continued for centuries. It was considered beneficial. Fact 85. Ancient Egyptians used papyrus for writing. Papyrus was made from reeds that grew along the Nile. The reeds were cut, pressed, and dried. The result was a surface suitable for writing. Papyrus was lighter than stone tablets. It allowed more portable record keeping. Fact 86. In Japan, taking off shoes before entering homes was standard practice. Outdoor shoes remained at the entrance. Indoor slippers were worn inside. This kept floors clean. The custom continues today. It has been consistent for centuries. Fact 87. Medieval European travellers carried their own utensils. They had a knife and perhaps a spoon. These travelled with them. When eating at an inn or as a guest, they used their own utensils. Providing utensils was not the host's responsibility. People were self-sufficient in this way. Fact 88. In ancient Rome, firefighters existed. They were called vigiles. They patrolled the city at night. When fires broke out, they responded. They used buckets, pumps, and demolition to control fires. Firefighting was an organized service. Rome was prone to fires, so the service was necessary. Fact 89. Inca people built extensive road systems. The roads connected different parts of the empire. They were built through mountains and valleys. The engineering was sophisticated. The roads facilitated communication and trade. They were maintained by local communities. Fact 90. In medieval Europe, a woman's hair was covered after marriage. Only her husband saw her hair uncovered. This was a matter of propriety. A woman who went out with uncovered hair was considered immodest. The convention was strong. It was observed consistently. Fact 91. Ancient Greeks voted by raising hands or with coloured stones. Different methods were used for different types of votes. The system was direct. Citizens saw each other's votes in some cases. In others, votes were secret. Greek democracy was participatory. Fact 92. In colonial America, wallpaper was expensive. Walls were more often whitewashed. Wealthy households might have painted designs or imported wallpaper. Most people had plain walls. Decoration was minimal. This was normal for the majority. Fact 93. Medieval people ate with their fingers, so washing hands before meals was important. Water was brought to the table in a basin. People washed their hands. Then they dried them on a towel. This was standard practice before eating. Fact 94. In ancient China, tea drinking became a refined practice. The preparation and serving of tea developed into a ceremony. Special utensils were used. The process had aesthetic and meditative aspects. Tea culture became sophisticated over centuries. Fact 95. Viking people told time by the position of the sun. They had no clocks. Daylight hours were divided into rough periods. The terms for these periods related to daily activities. Time was flexible and based on natural observation. Fact 96. In ancient Rome, honey wine called mulsum was popular. Honey was mixed with wine. The result was sweet. It was served at the beginning of meals. Mulsum was a common beverage. It appeared at many Roman dinner parties. Fact 97. Medieval European minstrels travelled from place to place. They performed songs and told stories. They provided entertainment and news. Minstrels were welcomed in communities. They were a source of information about distant places. Their performances were important social events. Fact 98. In ancient Egypt, people slept on beds raised off the ground. The elevation kept sleepers away from insects and scorpions that moved along floors at night. Bed frames were simple but functional. They served a practical, protective purpose. Fact 99. Colonial American children played with cornhusk dolls. Dried corn husks were twisted and tied to form figures. The dolls required no money to make. Materials were freely available after corn harvesting. Children made their own dolls. The dolls were simple, but served the purpose of play. Fact 100. In medieval Europe, dogs were used to turn cooking spits. Small dogs ran in wheels connected to the spit. Their running turned the spit, meat roasted evenly. The dogs were bred for this purpose. They were called turnspit dogs. This was their job. They worked in kitchens across Europe. Conclusion. These were 100 facts from history. They came from different times and different places. They described ordinary aspects of life. The facts are simply facts. They show us how people lived. They show us what was normal in other times. History is not only great events. It is also daily life, repeated over and over by ordinary people doing ordinary things. The facts presented here are quiet facts. They do not involve drama. They do not involve excitement. They involve the everyday. They involve the background of existence. People slept on stone pillows. They ate with their hands. They used what was available. They followed customs. They lived according to their understanding. These facts are not connected to each other. Each stands alone. Together, they form a collection of moments from the past. The moments are small. They are unremarkable individually. But they accumulate. They show the texture of life in other times. History continues. New facts are created every day. People live their lives. They develop customs. They solve problems. They adapt to their circumstances. In the future, our own daily practices will be historical facts. Someone may note what we did and how we lived. Our ordinary moments will seem distant and perhaps strange, but the basic patterns remain. People eat, they sleep, they work, they raise children, they create shelter, they form communities. These patterns cross all times and places. The details differ. The underlying patterns are consistent. This is what the facts show us. Human life has constant elements despite changing circumstances. The 100 facts are now complete. They have been presented. They exist as information. They can be remembered or forgotten. Either way, they remain facts. They describe what was continues to be what was. The past is fixed. These facts are small pieces of that fixed past.